All right, okay. So we're going to do the same thing here. Again, the structure of how I think about wines, and then shift to story time about the wines. With this one, this is really the structure is the heart of the matter that I want to get to. And again, the goal is to keep it easy. So it's my own idea of how to think about wines. A little bit comes from the WSET, a little bit comes from a professor I know in Napa Valley Wine College that I've watched and communicated with, and then my years of experience. So, but again, the goal is hopefully encompass the entire world of wine, but in easy ways. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to start in on evaluating wines, and we're just going to use what we've already got. So we're going to use sight and smell, taste, and touch, right? The other sense that we have, we're not going to use in wine, but here we're just going to use the senses that we have to think about all the wines. Now, the first thing that we can think about is the sight, meaning what it looks like. Now, I don't think this is too terribly important, and one thing that was pointed out to me is that if you look straight down at a color versus going sideways, they are two different colors, even if they're the same liquid. I think the two takeaways from sight, and again, I generally don't spend a lot of time on this, is how luminescent is it? How deep is the color as well? If it's fairly bright as a wine, and if it's dark, if it's fairly bright as wine, it means it's probably a young wine. If it's fairly dark as red wine, it means it's probably a pretty concentrated red wine. Whites are the opposite a little bit. If it's kind of bright in color, it's probably young. If a white is dark in color, it's probably old. The only other thing I think that's important about color is that when I started, darkness was prized, particularly in red wines. I have a feeling that in this market that might still be true. I have some people that I taste with regularly who are 40 years older than I am, and they really prize dark red wine still. The other thing that's kind of come and gone in my time as a fad was filtration. So turbidness, whether there was particles in the wine. I was at the leaving point when Kermit Lynch and Robert Parker actually agreed on one thing, which is that wines shouldn't be filtered. Now, that was at the very beginning of when I started, and filtering was kind of considered a no-no. I don't hear much about that anymore. On the other hand, what's come back is I see more unfiltered wines because of the natural wine movement. So, all of this is to say, look at the wine, and that's that. You know, I think if you drink enough, you get what's going on with the look of the wine, right? Now, it doesn't really wholly tell you that much. So, okay, the next step, and this I think is the more important one, is that we smell the wine. So we're using our other major sense, which is smelling wine. And in fact, this is a huge one because while we taste only a few things as human beings, we smell a lot of different things as human beings. Now, it has become very, very popular, particularly among the what is it crowd, to start listing off essentially everything that you can and associate it with what you smell. I actually hate that. And I love Hugh Johnson's quote of, "It's not a fruit salad, it smells like wine." So, yes, yeah, I much prefer that. And to me, professionally, oftentimes it comes down to, in my own mind, oh, that smells like Pinot Noir, and it smells like California Pinot. And it's not what you read in my emails about red cherries and raspberries and all of those kinds of things. The reason I end up writing that way is because that's the style of writing that sells wine these days, and has for a very long time. So when you read my emails, those are the hardest pieces to write, and they're the most repetitive because, believe it or not, if you have 15 Napa Cabs, they do actually kind of taste alike. So when you are thinking about wines, and this is to help you and to give you my idea of structure, the two things I'd most like you to think about in terms of smell are fruit and vegetable. Fruit's the easy one, and it's the one I use to sell wine. Because if you think of Pinot Noir as fresh raspberry or black cherry, it sounds appealing to people. Vegetable is weirder, but it's there. You know, most people don't like to have the smell of green pepper in their Cabernet anymore, but it's potentially there. If vegetable is too hard, then I just urge you to convert it to savory. Savory aromas, whether that's herby, whether that's earthy, whether that's mushroomy, you know, savory versus fruity. So oftentimes that's just my thought, and it's the way I describe things to people on the sales floor, especially in categories that might be very variable, like Rioja. Some of Rioja is about its extraordinary fruit character, some of it's about its savoriness. Now, if you can list other adjectives beyond that, go ahead, it will help sell the wine. Just make them your own. Don't make them up, make them your own. But I think that's the easy way. Is this a wine that's primarily about its fruit, or has more savoriness to it? Now, there are a couple of other smells that are important, but not dominant ones, I would say. One of the next smells that I think is really important is oak, and the use of new oak in particular. So new oak in red wines, and also in whites, will tend to express, you know, cinnamon, a baking spice. It'll tend to soften the wine and mellow it, but it's really that character of cinnamon, baking spice, richness, sometimes butter in Chardonnay. If you have a hard time thinking of that, if you've ever had bourbon or cognac, they're also strongly inflected by the use of oak. And the smells of the rich smells, the sweet caramel smells of bourbon are oak. So oak is a big one. Oak has come and gone in my years of being controversial or being less controversial. When I started, new oak was incredibly popular in wines. That's somewhat faded, and then there was a time period when it was considered being very negative in wines. And now I don't hear people talk much about it unless someone's done something extraordinarily different in terms of their oak usage. But oak, another characteristic of wine. The next thing is funky smells. And this is kind of interesting because these smells, like spoilage or Brett, were sort of latent smells that you would have to talk about a little bit when you hit French wine like that Rasteau you guys had. Just a little bit of barnyard or just a little bit of poopiness. Yes, They are actually, they are biological smells, and I do think they work out really well in a lot of wines. So they're there as part of something to talk about too. You can lump them in with savory if you want. The other savory barnyard.
Generally, barnyard is preferred to poopy, I think.
Yes.
On the sales floor, but you know, mileage may vary.
Yeah. The other part of that equation, which I see more and more, but I'm not sure you guys will hear, is in the last couple of years, another fad, and I'll say fad, and it would annoy people who like wines, is natural wines. And I actually don't particularly like the category of natural wines. I don't find them all that compelling. And I think they're essentially oftentimes unfinished or unstable wines. But they are extremely popular in Milwaukee and incredibly popular on the coast.
What is, I've never heard that.
Natural wine, the idea is, if I can get it right without insulting, is that as a winemaker, you're doing nothing to the wine except letting Mother Nature take its course. So the phrase that I think sums that up is 0-0, and which I think means zero additions to the wine and zero manipulation to the wine. I don't like that because as you hear that definition, it presumes that other wines are not natural, when in fact the use of sulfur as a stabilizing agent is natural. It's naturally occurring, and we've used it for a long time. And it's popular in Milwaukee, but I don't like the wines that much. I think they're pretty close to being flawed. I don't think you'll see a call for it here, but we see a call for it down there. Now, we work around my bias against those wines by lumping together, and you see this at the point of sale, by lumping together organic, biodynamic, and natural all in one category. So people who like those wines have to sort it out themselves and provide their own definition without arguing with us about what those wines are about. So that's another category of smells that gets lumped in there. So again, when you're piecing together the world of wine, I think just those 4 sets of smells and you've got it. You know, and if all you're getting is that wine is fruitier than the other one in your own estimation, to me, that's perfect. That gets you the structure that you need. Again, the next step is to start taking that and relating it inter and intra to the field. So, like going here and smelling these 2 Pinot Noirs and thinking about the difference in fruit profile, in savory profile, and then in fruit profile. Biological profile. Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the final smell I would note is tertiary aromas. And to me, that's the smell of age. So as a wine gets older, I generally find that the fruit character drops, and in return, or in addition to the fruit character dropping, other more savory smells come to the fore. Some wines are really about that. Like most English Bordeaux lovers that I know really love Bordeaux when it's lost most of its primary fruit character. Old Rioja tends to be about those smells versus anything else. So again, I think just an interesting way to talk and discuss those wines. But again, hopefully easy. So, okay, let's work through these in story time. And then our final flight will be relaxing tour. So I wanted to pour you guys Folk Machine. When I was here 2 weeks ago, I don't think anyone here had this wine. And this wine is extremely important to Waterford. It's extremely important to Waterford because I think it's one of our best Pinot Noirs that routinely comes in at this price. Now, when I started 17 years ago, Pinot Noir was getting really hot because of the movie Sideways. So Pinot Noir exploded because of Sideways, but no one had any Pinot Noir. So then the complaint became that Pinot wasn't smelling like Pinot, it was selling like Syrah that they couldn't sell and were labeling it as Pinot. So when this first came to me, which would have been in 2006, this was a Pinot Noir that smelled and tasted like Pinot Noir. It was an interesting one because at that time, something we're going to talk about in the third flight, the delicateness of the wine, the lack of a deep color in the wine, and the higher vibrancy of acidity in the wine were actually a little bit problematic to sell. And it was a little bit back then of explaining to clients, actually this is why you like this wine and this is why you want this wine is because it's lighter and delicate and lower in alcohol. And on top of that, I've always found that I think it's just immense quality, again, given its price. Now, this winery has a little bit of a strong connection to Wisconsin and Waterford as well. It's made by a man who I visited many times. His name is Kenny Lekiprikon. The father is Thai, if you're wondering where that last name comes from. The father is Thai, the mother is Jewish. So that's where the Lekiprikon comes from. He actually was a professional skateboarder as the start to his life. If you have any idea about skateboarding culture, you quickly realize it's hard to build a career that makes you any money. So he left professional skateboarding to get into organic farming. He went to UC Davis, graduated from UC Davis as well, and was then looking to be an organic farmer, particularly of grapes. It was a little bit hard to get into because you need a good amount of cash to buy a vineyard. So he also picked up winemaking along the way. So he started making wine for a couple of different wineries, and then he started his own label, I think in 2008 or 9, and it's Folk Machine. He actually has 3 separate labels, Hobo, Folk Machine, and then the one that's just Banyan Gewürztraminer. So Folk Machine, though, is kind of the main driver of it. So this has, since that time, kind of been our longest standing $16.99 Pinot Noir, because I really don't think there's anything better at this price. Now, he has leaned on the side of making it lighter. He sort of likes to go that way, so it's not our heaviest Pinot Noir at $16.99. So if you're working with a client who wants a little bit more body, this may not be the wine for them. But I think a really beautiful representation of Pinot Noir.
Would you say it's exemplary of California Pinot Noir?
You know, I think it is. It's got more. Again, I have to tag it with the price. It's got more fruit certainly than Burgundy or Oregon would, but it's still light and fresh and vibrant. He and I got in a fight once.
Not a great start.
Yeah. He and I got in a fight once because one of his other lines of wines is Ghost Rider, and I was actually arguing to him that he should release it at a much higher price point, and he didn't want to do that. And his response was that he wants his wine to be able to be drunk by people like him, ex-skateboarders who now have a family to support. So he really wants this wine to hit that price and doesn't want it higher. To the point that like he asked us, the Wisconsin wholesaler and me, if he could ditch the foil tops, because if he didn't put foil on the top, he could hold to the $16.99 price. He also asked if he could make it, what is it now, Central Coast, which is a much broader California appellation than doing it North Coast, which would essentially mean Sonoma and Mendocino. And the issue is price of grapes. He doesn't own any land, so he's working to try and get that bottle as good as it can be, but it's still very much at that price. So let's do a bonus round on that subject. So early in Kenny's career, when he's making wine, or still making wine, early in his career, he went to a organic grape fair and hit an organic farmer in Mendocino and Potter Valley. And they hit it off and really liked the idea of farming organically. And so he created a wine that we call the Potter Valley Pinot Noir. And its first vintage was 7, I think. I think its first vintage was 2007. So that wine was really a sensation at Waterford, and I thought it was just wonderful stuff. That wine, Kenny's Potter Valley Pinot, he skipped it in 2008 because of smoke, but he's made it every year since, and then it changes names every year.
Every year?
Yeah, so the first vintage was called Factories and Smoke. This vintage that we're having, this is 2011? 10. So this is 2010, where it's called Shapes and Shadows. You may have on your shelf The Mustard Squad is Coming as the name of the wine. Yeah. Let me just go jump and take a look at the camera. We'll get really like, what is going on?
We would remember that one. There is a cloud to it.
It's
Yeah.
light, I mean, it's lighter, and, it's 11 years, so.
Yeah.
You don't get the halo that you get with these, because you can see how, so on the right, you can see how it's all sort of the same color. Whereas on this, you've got the darker center, and then it gets lighter as it goes out. So as red wine ages, it tends to be more consistent throughout the.
So this is the Potter Valley Pinot. It is a sensation down in Farwell in particular, and somewhat in Delafield, that we tend to sell a lot of it when the new vintage comes. It's not at the same price, it's like double the price of the red label, and we don't have it as often. Again, it's a hard one to follow because the name changes every year.
Isn't unfiltered?
You know, when I was talking to him, he actually told me he likes to filter, and not heavily, but he really feels that a final light filtering polishes up the acid profile a bit, just makes the acid profile of the wine spark a little bit, so the opposite of what most people think of, oh, filtering's bad. It's like, no, I mean, filtering seems to just kind of clean up the acid profile a bit in all his wines. He also tends to top off everything with Riesling, so, no. But so I thought a fun one, this will also be a discussion we're gonna have in the next flight, which is that here is a very light wine, and it was always light, but I think it both, one, has lots of depth of flavor, and two, is aged really well.
Yeah.
It's 10 years old, and I don't think it's getting tired at all. And I think it's got an extraordinarily rich flavor, even though it's very light. So, okay.
You seem to see just a hint of the age and the color.
Yeah.
And it's delicious.
Okay. More story time going on to the Irie Vineyards. You guys have this one on the shelf. For Delafield, Oregon Pinot Noir, and specifically the Willamette Valley Pinot Noir as a category. So you're tasting this one, think about the differences. You've had now 2 Oregon Pinots. Think about the differences of Oregon versus California. Again, organizing your taste set of what those 2 things are about. So Irie can make the claim, and I think most people would substantiate this, that it is the founding winery of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. It's actually not technically true, and they would say that to you, but the fact remains that David Lett graduated from UC Davis in 1966. He purposely chose to go to Oregon, to go to Willamette Valley. He purposely chose to bring Pinot Noir with him, and he purposely chose to found a vineyard and a winery in Willamette to make Pinot Noir. Sort of like we heard with Lemelson, the wonderfulness of Pinot Noir. He got the Pinot Noir bug. He researched where he thought it would work the best. He wanted to create something like the beautiful Burgundies he had, but he wanted it to be in the United States. He's the first guy in modern Oregon to do that. He did it in 1966. So David Lett is the founding father of the Oregon wine industry and Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, to the point that he had the nickname Papa Pinot. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's like 2 or 3 years before like Age of those guys.
Yeah,
That was like 69, 70.
David at the time worked in his garage. David was later because they make 3 or 4 vintages in the garage. Yeah. So through an odd connection, David Lett also put the Willamette industry on the map. I'll make the story brief. There's a woman, David passed away in 2008. There's a woman who passed away this year named Becky Wasserman. Becky Wasserman is American, but married a Frenchman, later divorced him, but is kind of a seminal figure in modern Burgundy. Again, she just passed away. Her business was a broker of Burgundy, and she happened to have some of the absolute best Burgundy producers that she would sell into the United States. The company is still there, and we do sell Wasserman Burgundies. But through a funny connection, she started in the 1970s selling oak barrels to wineries. And she happenstance ended up at Irie. Sorry, I should make the final connection. David Lett founded Irie Vineyards. David Lett is the man, Irie Vineyards is the winery. Becky was selling oak barrels. She happenstance met David Lett, tasted his wine, liked him, bought 3 bottles, went back to Burgundy, and then by, again, total happenstance, stuck one of the bottles in a local Burgundy competition, and it won. Yeah, and then she repeated it later at a much more major Paris trade show, Burgundy exposition, and Irie won again. And that was 82, and so suddenly it put Oregon on the map, such to the extent that I think it's 84 where the Drouin family decided to visit Oregon and then buy vineyards because of essentially the connection that Irie had made with the rest of the world. So, David Lett always liked a very light Burgundy-esque Pinot Noir. He is famous for wanting his Burgundies to be able to make it to at least 10 years drinking. So 10 years out, they start drinking incredible. So that style continues to this day. So I remember interviews with him, 10, 15 years ago when people were complaining that his burgundies were his pinots were too light, and they didn't have enough weight or fruit character or concentration to it. I think the pendulum has swung back where people appreciate that more, but they try and hold to this style. So a great story, a great way for us to taste. Okay.
What is the name of that movie where they test the American wines, beat out the
Bottle shock.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a fun one too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was white wine, right?
It was both.
Yeah, it was
But they were focused on the Chardonnay, because they were focused on Chateau Margoleta.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. It was Alan Rickman eating and drinking things dramatically for an hour and a half, which it actually, I love it, so, I would watch that man do anything.
Yeah.
I love when he has guacamole for the first time. It's probably my favorite scene.
Yeah. Here. So final one of this plate. And again, I think just keep in mind the one thing we've learned here is smell. We're just thinking about the smell and fruit character versus savory. For this one, I wanted to pour you guys this. This is husband and wife who I've met. Pommier is the family name. And they're so fun. And she'll tell you they actually started with nothing. She comes from a winemaking family. He comes from a winemaking family in the village of Chablis, but neither of those families had an inheritance for them. So when they got married, they decided both that they would get married and that they'd also work progressively on the business together. So they founded Pommier as a producer of Chablis. So they have some land, they rent some land, and the highest they get is one Premier Cru figure that they have. So amazing wines, and I think they're just an absolutely astonishing value to them. Now, this is the Petit Chablis. Yeah, I think this one smells just so dramatic and so wonderful. This is the Petit Chablis. Petit Chablis is the larger area just outside of Chablis. The reason I chose this one as opposed to Chablis is it could give me a sales price. It was like just $1 or $2 difference, but the $1 or $2 difference means that it could get the sales price down really far to them. This year, normally this sells out fast for us. This year it arrived late just because of logistics. Like I was hoping to have our two Chablis, Morin and Pommier, by late summer, and I think they arrived like mid-autumn. And of course, mid-autumn, some people will keep drinking white wine, but it also means that the market is a little bit so in any case, it arrived a little bit late, so we weren't as successful with it this year as in previous years. But I think it's just extraordinary. I started with her and her wines 3 vintages ago, and I didn't save any of them. But again, I would guess that they would age beautifully because the last time we were there, she was hosting us in her cellar, but then she had hosted a Japanese group 4 days before. So she poured us all of the 4-day-old samples, and they were extraordinary. They were just amazing, in addition to these being amazing too. Sometimes you might see a bottle, if Left Bank, or excuse me, if Rebecca comes and sells it to you guys, they do make a wine that's Chardonnay. This is 100% Chardonnay. They make a wine that's Chardonnay, but it's from the south of France, and I think it's essentially called the Grapes of Wrath in France. There have been 2 vintages in their history, and they're both really recent, where they've essentially lost 90% of their Chablis fruit. So they went down to the Languedoc-Roussillon, bought some grapes in order to crush and make wine so they could actually have some sort of family income for the year. So if you see that bottle from Rebecca, that's what's going on with that.
Did you pick up any of the Chablis or the Premier Cru from this year?
Did you try?
Oh, no,
You just
from
mentioned
the Pommier shipment this year.
We did. I bought, I think, 3 cases of the Premier Cru, and it's gone. And this one was a real odd landing. This year was an odd landing year because it landed late. So it was a real, when I did the Evian special, it was real off time to do Chablis. So.
We could do some of the Chablis up here too.
Mhm.
We don't have a Chablis. We've got one Premier Cru, and we've got this.
Yeah. Rebecca has the Chablis,
Okay.
and I don't think Aaron bought any of the Premier their crew. But when Aaron and I buy, we tend to split it, meaning something that I'm going to mark down really low in price,
Right.
she won't buy for her team. So like if I take the petite Chablis because of the price point, she'll buy the Chablis for her team, which only means that we can also go and buy the Chablis if you want. So, yeah.
It's just a little hole we have to show.
Yeah.
In the